Sarah, thank you very much for speaking to me today about your new book, Influence: How Social Media Influencers Are Shaping Our Digital Future. And the first thing I want to ask you is just very quickly sort of tell us, who you are, what you do, and your career to date.
Sure. So I'm first and foremost a journalist. I've been a journalist for 15 years, and I started in local news and, reported a lot of core crime, politics for both locals, regionals, nationals. I started working in digital in about 2007. I worked on the launch of the Mail Online. And then I just sort of became addicted to digital publishing and the speed of it and how reactive it was. And this was kind of like, I guess, pre when people were using Facebook in that way, like everyone was really driving traffic through Google. And so I've kind of been through every stage of audience building and how publishing brands have done that. So it started with Google at Mail Online. I was the first digital editor at Tatler. I put the brand online, and and then we drove traffic through Twitter and Facebook. And SEO was a big part of our strategy too, but we were really looking at social. Then I went to HuffPost, headed up Style and its sister lifestyle brand, My Daily, and we had targets across every kind of like platform. So we had targets for Twitter, search, newsletter, Facebook. I'm pretty sure we had some targets off YouTube as well. And and it was really interesting to build an audience in that way, and sort of immediately, you could kind of see on the figures on a 24-hour basis, oh, like we haven't performed well in newsletter today, we're going to have to do twice as well tomorrow with how we sell our stories. So I did that. Then I went to WGSN, headed up B2C content for global. So that was like social video, its first consumer-facing website. And and I built the audience for the new website from scratch, and it was just great. And I loved it. And by the time I left there, I had consulted for a lot of clients. So I launched my own consultancy. I worked with Chanel, Estee Lauder globally, a lot of luxury brands, very briefly, the Labour Party. And then the thing that everyone was asking me for was influencer edits. So brands always wanted these curations of influencers where basically I could identify where their campaign story might intersect with the influencer's narrative. And they wanted a bit of background, investigation into the influencers. So do they have they had any controversies? And I was doing that on a day rate, and that seemed silly. So I launched a platform. I turned it into a product, which is CORQ, and we're a team of journalists, and we have an incredible influencer database, which is a curation. Every influencer has been profiled by our journalists, and we publish daily trends, analysis, and news. And I think that's it.
So with that in mind, obviously this new book of yours, Influence: How Social Media Influencers Are Shaping Our Digital Future. I read it over the weekend. It's a really great book, but you mentioned this a little bit, and also I guess with your previous answer, but what was your inspiration behind writing it?
Well, I just felt like there was a lot of bad information about influencer marketing. I think that a lot of people who work in this industry, it's really in their financial interest to encourage brands to work with influencers. It's really in their financial interest to sort of say, okay, you have to do influencer marketing, you have to work with this talent or that talent. And I don't make any money from influencer campaigns. We are an information, news, and intelligence platform. And I just felt like a kind of foundation text so that people could understand this industry and actually understand how digital influence works on every platform would be really helpful, because I think a lot of people have been thrown in the deep end, when it comes to influencer marketing. Like, you have your people who are amazing at PR, they're amazing at like more traditional marketing, and all of a sudden, social was added to their job, and it's like, oh, okay, I can do this. And then, and then video, and then influencers, and it's just like, it all starts to stack up. And often things move so fast. There's no time for training. And I just thought, you know what, if you could sit down with this book and read it over a couple of days and feel better afterwards, job done.
Hmm. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I was going to ask you that because obviously the book explores, several general themes, and then goes into the specific platforms, for obviously Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. They all serve different areas and different needs for people, don't they? So I guess, what did you find out when you were putting these chapters together?
Well, a lot of it was informed by my past experience as an editor using these channels to drive traffic. And also I had been working with influencers since about 2012, since really before, anyone called them influencers. They were just, people who had a big Twitter following or YouTubers. But I suppose the thing that I really learned is, YouTube is its own culture. It's not one thing. To sort of say that, to sort of say, okay, we want to work on YouTube, it's sort of redundant because YouTube is so many things. It's so many different worlds. I think definitely what I learned about Instagram is there are a lot of influencers who started building their audience there who are now very turned off by the platform, and the dramatic changes it has gone through in terms of its identity since Facebook acquired it and since the founders left. And I do think a lot of influencers are only really now starting to realize the power that they have and the fact that, that audience is theirs. And some of them are kind of becoming platform agnostic and saying, well, I know this audience followed me from YouTube to Instagram, so I know they'll follow me to another platform. And actually, if I'm less satisfied with Instagram, maybe I'm going to go somewhere else. Maybe I'm going to create my own thing. And there's definitely this emerging desire for less, mainstream platform reliance, where you're at the mercy of Instagram's algorithm.
Well, I mean, Sarah, I've got to ask you, obviously you mentioned these dramatic changes that are happening on platforms. I'm sure you must have seen the US president been unceremoniously booted off Twitter over the past week or so. I mean, because I was thinking about it, in a way, he's kind of the ultimate influencer, isn't he? Because he's taken his Twitter following to kind of grab the biggest job in the world, but it's all tumbled away in a house of cards almost. So, what does that feel to you like I guess a watershed moment for social media?
No, because it's too late. Like, Twitter banning Donald Trump is pointless. If they were going to ban him, they should have banned him like 5 years ago. Because the fact is now he has this audience. He has grown this audience. He has mobilized them. He has radicalized them over a period of 4 to 5 years. And now, to be honest, it's sort of too late. I mean, Twitter is kind of besides the point. I think as well, banning Trump, he will go to another platform, or a Trump digital platform is coming, mark my words, and his following will congregate there. But the thing with Trump that he's done so effectively, and the reason why, Twitter banning him doesn't really matter so much, is his ideology is all over the platform. So you can ban him, but are you going to ban everyone who's on the alt-right or who is a MAGA supporter? Probably not. Therefore, the ideology and the communities exist on the platform, whether Trump does or not. And actually, when I was writing the book, I interviewed a really interesting expert in the alt-right called Michael Wendling, and he's written an incredible book on that. And he's a BBC journalist. And and he was just talking about it's not really possible to deplatform someone anymore because they can just move to other platforms. And actually, when you take them off the mainstream ones and they go to create their own platform, or they go to lesser known ones, or ones that are more kind of under the radar, these people and these communities can become more extreme. So the idea that we can just chuck Trump off Twitter and he's gone is, to my mind, not true. It's incorrect.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, let's move on to the influencers themselves, because you obviously write a lot about the business or the brand side of things. And it always feels as though to me that for influencers and brands, it's almost, never the twain shall meet in a way, because influencers, there's a lot of sincerity in how they build up their audiences, the organic nature of it as well, which is kind of a lot of times an antithesis to a lot of brand communication. So how do you sort of see that? How have you seen that playing out in the book, and how do you see that playing out going forward?
Oh, it's so tough, like, because I think that it's hard on both sides of, of the partnership, because on one hand, like the influencer knows, if they start talking in brand speak, their audience is going to call them out for it. But then the brand also has KPIs, and they have really strict frameworks to work to sort of create within often. So, everyone's under pressure to somehow meet in the middle and compromise and create something that's engaging. And often it's just not possible. I think as well, we do have to remember that a lot of brands are really early in their kind of journey with influencer marketing. So for them, they're still just dipping a toe. The idea that they would give an influencer freedom to do whatever they wanted with a product or their brand they're just not there yet. But you do see some brands who are a lot farther along. They've accumulated more data. They know what they're doing. They're very confident. And you see really great things happening. I mean, like Depop does really good stuff. Its videos are so good. I think its influencer marketing for men and women is equally as strong. They're great at picking talent. But you get there after a lot of experimentation and work. So it's really tricky to navigate. I really believe that.
Yeah, because there's an interesting quote in the book that you cite from Catherine Ormerod. I'm just we aren't robots as much as people want to reduce us to conversion rates. And I thought, that's it in a nutshell. But at the same time, there is a similarity there in a sense, because obviously marketing is so ROI, so data driven these days. But influencers, they do know the rules of engagement themselves, don't they? So it's all about testing. It's all about getting their own personal brand going as well. So there are similarities at play here, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah. I think that there are similarities. I think influencers are definitely looking at their platforms every day, and they're saying, okay, that worked really well, that didn't. I'm going to do a bit more of that thing that worked well. And that way I'm going to give the audience what they want. And I think that, both parties are trying to do the same thing, but what the audience wants from the influencer, which is like a human lens, it's not necessarily what they're looking for from the brand. And I think as well, it's really difficult, because obviously when you're working with an influencer, you're working with a human being who is going to try and humanize your brand and your message in the best way possible for their audience. But at the same time, the brand needs to show that when they have worked with influencers, they have made a worthwhile investment. And I think that's the thing. We are never going to get away from this element of data and conversion and engagement and all of those different metrics that make brands feel safe in their investment. So we just have to find a way to sort of meet in the middle somehow, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, on a different subject, I mean, how do you think COVID-19 has impacted influencer marketing over the past, 9 months or so?
Oh, it's been so interesting, because I think that a lot of some influencers, it was really clear that they were relying on press trips and really incredible events that were paid for by brands to create exciting content. I think some influencers have shown that they need a sort of I suppose, really incredible context to produce entertainment. And then we've seen other influencers who have just been so good at using their own surroundings. They have done whatever they can to make their audience feel better. They've made themselves available. They've been engaging their audience more than ever. Victoria McGrath, who her YouTube channel is In the Fro, she's done fantastic things on there and on her Instagram. We've seen entertainers like Munya Chihuahua, who he has produced just this era defining comedy on TikTok and Instagram. And, you know, he has springboarded to Netflix. He was a co-writer on Charlie Brooker's latest show. And so we have seen these people who, on one hand, we've seen some influencers show that maybe they don't have the creativity to be spectacular during lockdown. And as a result, I think we're going to see the influencers who can rise out of this. It's not going to be everyone. And then on the other hand, we have seen these other influencers just, you know, do this incredible job. And as a result, many of them are springboarding to these mainstream opportunities much faster than we have seen influencers do that before. I mean, if you think about it, you know, one of the influencers who has most famously done that in the UK is Joe Sugg and Strictly. But, you know, by the time that he did that, he'd been on YouTube for, I think, about 10 years. You know, so that took a very long time. What we're seeing now is culturally, people are finding it more acceptable to see, you know, talent rise out of social media.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I remember, you know, a lot of people saying he had a bigger audience effectively than the established TV and TV stars that they had. And I can't remember exactly, it didn't quite translate to him winning it. I can't exactly remember, but there was definitely a crossover, wasn't there, that needed to be bridged.
Yeah, and I think it was a really interesting experiment for Strictly to sort of see, okay, how can we work with this person? And actually, I think even though his audience, you know, certainly a proportion of them were watching every week, they were voting for him every week. You know, I think also he managed to charm that mainstream audience who aren't necessarily going to tune into YouTube, but they saw him working really, really hard, and he really wanted to do a good job. And I think that's the thing. It's like, you know, he was able to make that transition because his intentions were really clear. He took it really seriously. But I think that's the thing, you know, what we're going to see, I think, in probably like the next 18 months is we're going to see more mainstream broadcasters, you know, I suppose, like, think more broadly about how they work with digital talent. And some of those digital talents are going to translate really well on other platforms like the BBC, like Netflix, Channel 4, and some of them won't. Their audience won't follow them. And it'll be really interesting to see who is able to make that journey successfully.
Yeah, I mean, so going back a little bit to the platform side, you obviously mentioned the new talent that's coming through. Obviously, you write in the book that Instagram was kind of the millennial revolution, and TikTok and other platforms are presumably, you know, the Gen Z revolution. You know, what can we expect the sort of, I guess, the next generation of young adults or even, you know, teenagers to bring to this conversation? And you've already mentioned a few things in terms of creativity.
Well, I think it's really interesting because I think millennials sort of created Instagram in a way that, you know, a lot of them came of age during the recession, so around about 2008, or they graduated into that. And actually, rather than them kind of like take to heart the fact that they were surrounded by global economic uncertainty, and perhaps, you know, and every time they looked at a news website or opened a newspaper, it was telling them your life is going to be terrible. They kind of like created this idealistic world on Instagram, you know, and as a result, you know, almost at the same time, we saw these like fast producing brands spring up on the platform. And, you know, they were able to create this world that was sort of like an escape from the world that we were living in at the time. Whereas Gen Z has responded to, you know, I would say the past 4 years of political, social, and economic uncertainty by facing it head on. They are, I would say, they're a very political generation, and whether that be, you know, they're looking at politics and talking about politics from an issues driven space as opposed to a sort of like bipartisan space. You know, they are talking about issues which are very grave in a way that millennials didn't. So, you know, we'll see TikTokers teaching their followers about climate change. We'll see them talking about gun violence. We'll see them talking about Black Lives Matter. They're not scared to be political. And definitely, I would say that, you know, a lot of the stars who came out of YouTube and Instagram, they only really started talking about topical issues this year off the back of COVID and Black Lives Matter. And prior to that, most people stayed away from any kind of politics because I think they were quite concerned that this would impact their income and the brands who wanted to work with them. Whereas I don't think Gen Z care.
I mean, looking at the book as well, I mean, it does wonder whether influencers do get a bit of a bad rap sometimes. Obviously, you mentioned the term freeloader, and you do see the odd incident that occurs that isn't great. But ultimately, they are, you know, they're content creators, they're video editors, they're even marketing managers, kind of all rolled into one. So, to a certain extent, Sarah, was this book almost a defense of influencers in a way?
No, not at all. I mean, I have to say I'm pretty unbiased in a way towards influencers as a whole. I think some are very good. I think some are terrible. And that's the thing, you know, you do see things like influencers who they have been historically racist on Twitter, and those tweets emerge and they kind of say, oh, but I was so young. And you just kind of think, do you know what? When I was 17, I wasn't racist. So I'm not sure that that is a defense. And actually, I think that there are you know, that we see influencers make slip ups and express really awful views and opinions on a fairly regular basis. These controversies happen all the time. And I really hope that brands are thinking about understanding who they work with better, because whether it's directly or indirectly, they are funding the content which you know, exists around these views. And I think that we need to take a more moral approach. We need to kind of say, okay, I'm not going to work with influencers who have been racist in the past. You know, I think that's really important. So no, it's not a defense of influencers. It's more explainer, I suppose, on how all of this works and how it all became to be.
Who was the most interesting person you spoke to when writing this book, and why?
I think the person who I enjoyed speaking to the most was Taha Khan, who he was a really he's a Gen Z YouTuber, and he was talking about basically how, you know, how diverse YouTube is, how, you know, one looking at YouTube as one thing is incorrect, how really as well how the sort of I remember him saying that there was this kind of like fire hose of politics in 2016 with the election of Donald Trump and also the Brexit vote, and how, you know, having that political awakening in your late teens was sort of almost unbearable because you just felt this intensity of the moment, and a moment in which you had no power to vote, you had no power to sort of say what you felt, but you were feeling it every single day by looking on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or YouTube. So it was almost like really understanding Gen Z in the sense that they have been surrounded by politics through social media from such a young age, and have felt like they are unable to escape it. And I think as well, he was talking about how he has muted certain words on Twitter because he just can't bear it anymore. And, you know, I think it's really interesting talking to these people because actually their experience of the internet is really insightful. It really gives you a sense of why we get the content that we get from them, you know?
Yeah, because I suppose it ties back into a point that you previously made about the need for brands to take on these influencers who haven't, you know, been racist, etc., and so on. Because there's the combination of, as you say, the Gen Zers, they do have, in my opinion, you may disagree, they do have seemingly a more kind of ethical core to them. That's what they're values based. And as well as that, as you say, they've been, you know, citizens of the internet for a very long time, so they're less likely to have made such a mishap when they were 17, maybe, like millennials did.
Yeah, I mean, potentially. I think that, do you know what? I think inaccuracies always arise when we say this generation is going to act in this certain way, and, you know, blanket, they are more ethical, or they care about the internet more, or whatever. I think that we definitely can say that they have been exposed to more than any other generation. They've been exposed to more opinions and news than anyone else. And I think that does help, that does shape, that will shape a person's view very differently than, say, to mine, where, you know, I'm 37. What did I get when I was growing up? Newspapers. And I would choose to read them or not. So I, you know, I didn't really have an experience of a newspaper that was necessarily personal to me and the way that they have experienced news via platforms like Twitter. So, I mean, but I do think broadly, you know, we can see that brands like, for example, I mentioned Depop again, you know, they have done really well with that generation because, you know, there is definitely, they definitely do seem to have a greater understanding and care for the environment and acting as an ethical consumer. And also they have this desire for nostalgia, which means that a lot of the things that they're buying, you know, they are looking for items from, you know, like Y2K or the 90s. And, you know, and so what they're looking for as consumers is quite different to what millennials were looking for, which I would say is trend-driven, affordable products. And people before that, which I guess was me. I mean, I can't really remember what I was looking for, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. I mean, the final question I wanted to ask you, Sarah, was just, I guess, a quick elevator pitch for the book. Really, you've obviously discussed this, you know, previously, but I mean, if you were to say, you know, who should buy this book and why?
Influence is for anyone who needs to understand the influencer industry, how it works, and the people who have created it. And if this has become part of your job, or it is something that you want to go into in the future, it's going to tell you how to do that really well and also entertain you at the same time.